everyone, I'm Lauren, and today is the first video that I'm going to be doing for the end of 2019 stuff. Yay! Woo! Since last year was the start of booktube for me, I haven't done these kind of end of the year type videos, so I'm really excited to do them today. I'm going to be talking about my worst books of 2019. Keep in mind that just because I don't like these books does not mean you're a bad person if you like them or whatever. If you like these books, that's awesome, and you're cool. These are books that I just didn't like for some reason or another, and I just want to talk about them because I wanna, and I'm gonna. So here we go. So my 10th worst book of 2019 was The Ancient Magus Bride, The Golden Yarn. I think it's supervised by Kore Yamazaki. This is a collection of short stories based around the Ancient Magus Bride manga series, and the mangaka Kore Yamazaki writes one of the short stories in this collection, but most of them are by other authors. I'm not very familiar with the other ones. I didn't like most of the stories here. A lot of them were boring, just kind of nothing was really happening, or I didn't care about the characters. I did like the one written by the mangaka herself, and I think I liked one of the other ones. But the rest were either boring or really dumb. It just didn't make any sense. Number 9 worst book I read. This is gonna ruffle a few feathers perhaps, but for me that is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, which is the second book in the Mistborn series. You can also put this on probably my top disappointing book of the year, but it's also here in worst book but I did not like most of this book. I really loved the first book in the series, which I don't know what year I read that in, but I really loved it, and I was really excited to get to The Well of Ascension, but a huge portion of the book I kind of didn't see the point to, and a bigger factor of it is a lot of the book was spent on kind of politics that I was really bored by. So it just really didn't work out for me, all this romance and politics that I didn't really like, and it was a very big slog to get through. Number 8 is Juni Taisen Zodiac War by Nishioisi. Juni Taisen is a light novel. It centers around this battle that happens every 12 years. 12 people are invited, and each person represents an animal from the zodiac, and they have to fight to the death within a time limit. Whoever's the last person standing gets any wish granted. There's a lot of battles and stuff in here, but I just didn't really find them very interesting. And I think, unfortunately, due to the nature of this kind of setup with only one person winning at the end kind of thing, there's gonna be characters killed off all the time. And so you never really get to know any one character, and so there wasn't really much plot either, because just the whole thing is the battle. But for me, I really like characters, and I really like plot, and there wasn't either of those here. It's just you're getting these battles, and that's about it. The other really big detriment to this book, and it is a spoiler, I won't say what the spoiler is, but a part of this book gives away the order in which people die. If you know the order in which people die, then you will know who the winner is. And I found that out. So there's 12 chapters, and so I found this out in the second or maybe third chapter, so I didn't really like much about this. Number 7, I have Saga of Tanya the Evil Volume 1, Deus lo Volt by Carlo Zen. So this is an interesting light novel series where the main character is this really smart but not really caring businessman, and he dies and is reborn into a girl's body in this kind of Germanic type country. I don't think it's supposed to be Germany, but they're in the middle of a war, and it's kind of like World War II. And this guy is trying to survive because the war sucks. And he wants to try and live as cushy a life as possible. And so he figures that he needs to go through the military ranks as this young girl. I initially read this because I watched the anime and I really loved it. However, with the light novel series, it gets into some heavy topics like philosophy and psychology and sociology and some other topics that I'm not really sure about, and like it gets really deep into these topics and it takes up a very large portion of the book, and I just don't really get it, and it's not very interesting to me either, so I don't want to try and get it, at least not the way that it's explaining these concepts in the story. Like, I want the story, I want the characters, I don't want to be learned. I'm not reading a nonfiction here. And it really bogs down the light novel for me. Number 6, I have Binti, the Complete Trilogy by Nnedi Okorafor. So what I read here was a collection of 3 sci-fi novellas. I can't really explain this series very well, and that's kind of partially why it's on here. It's a very weird series. I did like the first novella in here, which is just called Binti, but then the second and third novella in this collection, Binti Home and Binti Night Masquerade, I don't know if it's in that order, it just gets so weird. There's this weird magic thing with like math, and there's a lot of like trying to figure out mind stuff, and then it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. Binti kind of whines a lot, especially the ending for me is so what the fuck is what? It's just so weird and bizarre, and I don't know what was going on 90% of the time. So my number 5 is very interesting for this list, and that is The Utterly Uninteresting and Unadventurous Tales of Fred the Vampire Accountant by Drew Hayes. Yeah, and I found it utterly uninteresting. That's not the point. The point is that this guy, he's an accountant, he's not interesting. He gets turned into a vampire, and then he goes on adventures when he figures out that there are other supernatural type beings in his area, kind of thing. And all this shenanigans happen. I liked the intro when he was just figuring out that there were all these other things that he wasn't aware about. He knew he was a vampire, and that I knew there were vampires, but he didn't know about all this other stuff that was going on. But this is supposed to be a comedy type series, comedy, supernatural, with a little bit of romance type thing. And, oh man, the comedy in here did not really mesh well with me, and that was the main part of the story. The humor in here is very kind of just, this is a random thing. Haha, isn't that funny? How random is that? Like, there's a character in here that is a werepony, and like, isn't that silly? It's a werepony. And I don't like that kind of humor. It's one of those things, if you like that kind of humor, if it sounds silly to you and you read part of it, it's silly, you're probably going to like it, but I do not. My number 4 is The Thief Who Pulled on Trouble's Braids by Michael McClung. This is a story about a thief kind of character, and she comes across this artifact that a friend gave her to look after, but she finds that her friend's dead in the morning, and so she has to figure out like what the heck this artifact is and why people would kill for it and shenanigans. It's kind of has some mystery aspects to it with trying to, gather clues and investigate areas and that sort of thing. And I liked the initial premise of it, but it really quickly turned into, I don't know why the characters are doing certain things, and it just didn't make sense. And I was very bored. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like what was going on. I can't think of much that I liked other than the initial premise was kind of interesting. Number 3 is The Tale of Despero by Kate DiCamillo. This is either like a middle grade or a children's book, depending on how you classify it. And it stars this mouse, and he likes reading, and that's weird for mice, so he kind of gets banished, and he goes on a quest to save people, and there's a bunch of other different things going on. And this is another one I like the premise of, I like the initial beginning, but it really quickly got really annoying and weird. I don't remember exactly what the weird parts were. The thing that I really remember and I really hated about Tale of Despero was the narrator. The narrator kept on doing this thing where they would kind of demean the reader. So obviously this is written for a younger audience, so it makes sense with a simpler language perhaps. But the narrator kept doing this thing where they're like, oh, such and such character felt empathy for whatever. Dear reader, do you know what empathy means? Have you ever been in this situation where blah 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 blah, and then etc etc etc. Now do you know what empathy means? Have you ever felt empathy? That is what this character was feeling. There was a bunch of times where the narrator would stop to define words and go on these weird tangents to give the reader an example on what that word meant. If this was being read to a kid, it just makes it come across as, haha kid, you're stupid. You don't know what empathy means. You're just a stupid kid. At least that's what I feel like. And since I'm an adult, I know what empathy means, or I like to think I do. I don't need this, and it doesn't come across as funny, if that was the intent. I don't know what the intent was, and for me it just comes across as demeaning and stupid and a waste of time. If it did not have those, I don't think this book would be on this list. It just happens so often that it really ruined my experience with the book. I would still not like it, I think, because there were some weird aspects that I don't really remember. Because I read this in April, so I don't really remember, and I tend to forget a lot about what happens in books that I really don't like. If the narrator didn't exist, it would probably not be on this list. It would probably just be okay. So everything before had been a 2-star. It was really hard to order those just because my thoughts kind of change on certain things, and I can put some of the previous entries in different orders. Like I could switch a few things around probably. However, for my number 2 and number 1 spots, these are my 1-star rating books. I've only rated 2 books 1 stars, and these are the 2. Definitely, these 2 are the worst that I have read, or my least favorite, I should say. So for my number 2 worst book, that is The Tea Master and the Detective by Elliot de Bodard. This is a science fiction retelling of Sherlock Holmes. So I have not read a Sherlock Holmes book before, so I can't really speak on to how different and how the same this is. I mean, it seems like it's very different considering that it's a science fiction retelling and a lot of the stuff is very Chinese inspired, I think. But what I got here was I didn't like the characters. I was very confused on why certain characters were doing certain things. Holmes herself, or the Holmes-inspired character herself, would sometimes say some things that were definitely wrong, and I think the author meant for them to say the correct thing. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember reading and like, that doesn't sound right, and some reviewers pointed out exactly what it was, I think, on Goodreads. There were just a few different things that weren't really explained, but then explained later. Like, the Watson-inspired character in one scene drank tea with somebody else. I was like, what? How is this ship drinking tea? I had to flip back a few pages and go, like, did I miss something? Or am I misunderstanding? And like, I guess ships can drink tea in this universe. Cool. And then later, the ship drinks tea again, but then it explains how the ship drank tea. So I'm like, why did they not explain that first and then, switch the order? Don't not explain and then explain later. This seems kind of weird in this context. It's nothing about it I liked. And that's why it's a 1 star. Didn't like the characters, didn't know what was going on with the plot at all, and it's just nonsensical things that were explained. I really did not like this at all. It was some of the slowest 96 pages I've ever read. And then finally, my number 1 spot. Number 1, this is the worst book I read in 2019, and that is Ingo by Helen Dunmore. This is a YA fantasy with these mer folk in it. The 2 main characters are brother and sister, and they lose their father in the sea, and then later they come across mer people, and they gotta explore with the mer people and help them out or something. This was just really boring and really, really dumb. It was a little bit of an easier read than the Tea Master and the Detective, just because the writing was simpler and there wasn't anything particularly confusing. But it was really, really boring. The big problems that I had with this was the 2 main characters. Most of the book, they were arguing amongst each other on whether or not to go back to Ingo. Like, they go to Ingo, and then later they're like, oh, we shouldn't go because it's dangerous. And the other one is like, oh, we should go because we gotta help them out, and it's so much fun. They can't harm us at all. It's okay. The other large part of Ingo is when they do actually go into Ingo, when they aren't bickering amongst themselves and they go into Ingo, it turns out that Ingo is just everywhere in the ocean. Everywhere is Ingo. There's no special cool mer places. Like, there's no mer towns. There's no mer descriptions on like, oh, what they do or like anything. It's technically part of a series. I definitely will not be reading any more in the series. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I have no idea how long this video is gonna be. I've been recording forever, but those were my worst books of 2019. Again, if you liked any of these books, that's cool. I didn't, but that's okay. You're cool for liking these books. But if you have read any of these books, let me know your thoughts below. Coming up, I'm also going to be doing a best reads of 2019 as well, and I hope you check that out as well. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again for another video. Bye!